Whatever Next, Unplugged. Conversations about making transformation more human, more honest, and more likely to stick. And here's my next guest, Daryl Carr, Human-Centered Advisor. Hi, welcome to Whatever Next Unplugged, the podcast that lifts the lid on transformation. And today I have Daryl Carr, who's based down in Australia and is a human-centered advisor. I'm so pleased to have him on the show to hear his perspective from the other side of the world. Hi, Daryl.
Hi, Lisa. Thank you for asking me to be part of your show.
It's great to have you here. I've written a book. It was Whatever Next, making the most of being more human, more honest, and to help transformation stick. And it was very much from my lived experience and very much from the lived experience here in the UK, with a bit of European slant from my time at Zurich. You're the other side of the world, as far as I'm concerned. You've had a very similar career to I have. And I'm intrigued. Have you had a similar lived experience to mine, or has it been different?
Yeah, and obviously there are subtle differences between the environments that we work in and the cultural differences around the world. I'm sure there's as many similarities, though, as there are differences. Having a look through your book, of course, which is fantastic, I see lots of things that I recognise strongly. And one of the things that sort of came to mind while sort of reflecting on what we're going to talk about today was that these conversations are not new either. So I've been involved in what used to be called business process reengineering efforts for 30 years, where we, fundamentally rethink how an organization works. And now we would call it a digital transformation, but back in the day we had different names for it. But it was the same idea. It was about reinvention and understanding what it meant to rethink how an organization works and what the processes would look like, what the systems would look like, and of course what it meant for the people in the organization. So yeah, this is a long-running conversation. I think we tend to stick new labels on things for the sake of being able to market them better. But fundamentally, it's very similar to the types of experiences that I've had.
It does feel like we're just sticking new labels on things that we've been tackling and having to sort of address for decades. What do you think's behind that?
I certainly think from an industry perspective, it's driven by the desire to come up with something new to be able to sell services. So I think that's that constant reinvention that occurs in that space as well. But fundamentally, the same things are there. But of course, we've seen over that period of time, if we're talking about something that goes back to the mid-90s, in terms of my own experience with these things, that is a lot of change. We don't have to look back very far before we didn't have a smartphone in our pockets, and I remember working on mid-range computers with green screens and having 80 characters and 24 lines to play with to do all your UI designs. That's obviously very different from the experience that we can create for people in our organizations now. Oddly enough, sometimes we don't. We still constrain ourselves to some terrible user experience. But we certainly have a whole raft of new capabilities and new capacity to deliver to people. So I think that tends to be a driver of difference. But along with that comes a whole set of new terms. And so I think we're sort of driven by the advancement of technology and the way that it plays out in the business environment as well. So as a consequence, we have new things to talk about. But at its fundamental core, it's still trying to run a business, trying to make it profitable, trying to make it a sort of place that people want to come and work and enjoy the experience of doing so and satisfy your customers or your citizens or whatever it is that you're trying to provide a service to.
And it's interesting you say all of that, because the rigor back in the 1990s, when we had the constraints of the technology of the time, we put more into the human side when our technical constraints were tougher than where we are today, where the technical constraints are a lot less. And the human side that we were paying so much more attention to in the 80s, 90s, and especially when we went on the digital transformation, seems to be normalizing out and becoming more bland. Has that been your experience?
Yeah, I think so. So it's the old sort of necessity is the mother of invention sort of thing. So when you are constrained, you did actually have to think about these things. And I've had many long conversations about how to best use a very limited user interface, as an example, how to best work with constraints of the systems at the back end that might have storage and memory problems. And those things sort of has, I guess, drifted away a little bit out of the conversation as we've delivered more powerful systems and more powerful backends and network connectivity. And, as I was talking about before with the smartphones, ubiquitous connectivity just changes expectation. And so that's an interesting sort of aspect of the change that's occurred over the years as well. So we get the consumerism side of things driving expectations in the workplace, which is very different to what was able to be done back in the day. So yeah, I think it has changed things. I've seen a lot of new skills and new titles, some come and go over those years, but there certainly is, I think, a very different set of conversations that occur now because we can.
And what are some of those new titles that you've seen?
Yeah, so obviously, as you get sort of advancing capabilities in the technology space, and they can do more things that otherwise required technical skills previously. You see things like the back in the day, of course, as I was saying, we had very, very limited capabilities in terms of user interface. So I've seen the growth of the UI and UX disciplines, and they're still with us. And I've seen them sort of grow and morph over time. But you also used to have people that were very focused on the internal capabilities of the systems that we were using, and that's sort of been moved away. You don't do quite as much in terms of your computer operators that used to come in at night and run the batch systems and all those sorts of things and do the backups to tape and send them off site. And now you've got a single pane of glass being provided by a cloud services provider. And so these things change. That's fine. And they introduce new capabilities and they also remove old ones. And of course, we're seeing that a lot play out at the moment with conversations, our endless conversations around AI and what it's going to do for us.
And then we move into, with all of those new names of roles that pop up, often communities of practice pop up around them. And those communities of practice are there for good reason. You're a great believer in communities and communities of practice, and you drive many yourself. What's been your learning in establishing those communities, and how can we get more out of them, not just for our discipline, but also for the human and honest side of transformation?
Yeah, it's so important to me. So obviously, I look at enterprises as a fundamentally human pursuit. So that's the old definition of a collective human endeavour is what I define as an enterprise. So that means that we have people in organisations and we have people with different skills in the organisations, and they require ongoing development of their capability. We need to keep up with technology advancements. We need to keep up with perception around the delivery of professional services. And so it's in our best interest, I think, that we have the ability to communicate with each other in our specialisms. And so those professional communities, and they can exist externally as a public community, but also internally as communities of practice. They provide benefit to organisations, and they also provide benefits to the individuals as they go through their career. And I think particularly with the rate of change accelerating, having the ability to find people with similar interests and share our experience with each other and support each other is fundamentally important because as much as we're automating lots of things and talking about AI and things that are of an artificial nature, we still have that very fundamental need from a human perspective to find connection, to be able to share with each other and to be able to grow and develop and find out what our future path should look like. And that's definitely not the sort of thing that I think we should do in isolation.
They definitely give the opportunity to get out and hear other perspectives, to reflect and reframe and reconsider maybe where we are delivering in our own right with the benefit of others. And often they can be quite professionally focused on the function of the role. And how are you seeing communities bring in the human side? Is it just the way they operate, or is it some of the focus that happens in those communities?
Yeah, and that differs greatly depending on the circumstance. So some are very technically focused, and that might be the sort of thing that some people are particularly interested in. And having run many events over the years, there's certainly an audience for having a very technically focused community, and there's also the opposite end where you're really sort of talking about networking opportunities, about establishing connection, about sharing experience and knowledge with each other. And I think that most communities would probably benefit from the idea of having a mixture of those things. So, because you do have a range of people and personalities that exist in these communities. And so the one thing you never want to do, of course, is try to please everybody all of the time. We know that's a folly. So it's about having that balance, about striking that balance, about all of the needs of the members of the community, but doing that over a period of time. As I say, some things do lend themselves very much to the technical side of things, but at the end of the day, these are people and they're trying to find a path for themselves, and coming together with a set of common interests is always beneficial. And that's what I've found when I've run events, is that people will always come up to me and say, that was fantastic. We need to do more of this. I need to be able to step away from my desk occasionally and actually meet people and find that we're all, challenged with the same problems. And if we share with each other, then those problems are lessened.
You said there's internal communities of practice and external communities of practice, but essentially they're showing up in the workplace, and they're showing up in the workplace where we're handling transformation. Over the years that you've been in work, how has the workplace changed in the world of transformation?
That's a very good question. I don't know that it has. I think the subject matter changes. I think the expectations change, and of course there's a lot of external influences that drive that. But I don't think the mechanics and the general concept has changed very much at all. I think it's still trying to get people to develop a common understanding and understand how to work with each other to drive an outcome. As I've said many times in conversations about architecture, it's not really about the architecture, it's about people, and it's about relationships, and it's about communication. And so those things haven't really changed. We haven't changed as people for a long, long time. So we still have the same needs. We want to be understood. We want to feel like we're doing a good job, something that we can be proud of, that we've made an impact, and that we're recognised for the efforts that we make. And I don't think that's changed. And then the rest of it is just whatever the topic of conversation is, and how that might be influenced by cultural factors and external impacts and the like.
Do you think enough is being done to address the human side of workplaces, or do you think it's being left to chance?
Yeah, that's going to differ depending on where you are and the organisation you work in, and the culture, geographical differences as well. But personally, I think there's an increased focus in that area, but is not probably as far as we need to be. I think there's still a very heavy focus on cost and outcomes that are not necessarily aligned with human well-being and the sense of being fulfilled and happy by the work that we do, and it fills up a lot of our lives. So I think that there's plenty of scope for improvement.
And the agentic AI era is here. What's your view on the rise of AI, the rise of agentic AI, and how that's impacting the workplace and the transformations that we're on?
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff. We actually had I helped to run a community here in Perth called Digital Transformation Perth, and we have meetings very regularly, every 6 weeks or so. And last night we had some people talking about agentic AI and how they've helped organisations establish this capability. And they started talking about this idea of your AI coworker or your digital coworker. And I thought it was a really interesting sort of term that kind of stuck with me about thinking about how you introduce these capabilities in the workplace. And of course, there's lots of conversations going on about, well, we're taking the knowledge that we've gained through delivery of some sort of business process or service, and we're effectively transferring that knowledge and understanding and capability over into a machine. And there's a sense of unfairness about that we're sort of training our replacement. But there are certainly, I think, limitations in the capabilities right now. I know they'll get better, but there is, I think, an effort that needs to happen to help people understand what they are good for and what they're not good for, and also um, understand what it means for the human being as we go through this transition. And I think I read a book many years ago, The Future of the Professions, that talked about how AI systems will more likely automate tasks rather than jobs. And so that then leads down the path of, well, rethinking what it is to have a job and what it is to interact with these systems to be able to deliver the outcomes that are required. I think that, as I say, I think there's still a lot of work to be done to understand how to use them effectively. Probabilistic systems are counter to what I would normally describe as the steady state of an organization, which relies on the reliability and regularity of the execution of a process. So there does appear to be a mismatch between those two things. But I'm sure that they are things that we'll discover better ways of working with as we improve the systems and we figure out what that means in terms of running our organizations.
You've written in some of the work I've read that you've written recently, you said that the only thing that's left when all this technology is deployed is humanity itself. And I see a lot of stuff being discussed around technology. I do hear when I talk to people like yourselves that are interested in the human side, I hear humanity. But do you think the transformation profession itself, the CIOs, the CTOs, the CEOs are paying enough attention to the consequences and the humanity aspects of where we're driving the AI agenda?
Well, in my experience, no. I think there's plenty of evidence to suggest that that's not the main driver, and I think that there's symptoms, that are available for us to notice if we go looking. And I was talking to somebody just today about the idea that there are a lot of graduates that are currently struggling to be able to find work across various industries and skill sets. Because the work is disappearing, and so they're societal concerns, and of course they tend not to be part of the conversation within a specific organisation. So a transformation program, for instance, won't have a scope item that takes into account human well-being. Or the impact on society. So there's no reason to believe that these things are being connected for any purpose that serves the organisation. So that's a very different conversation, and one that I think there's avenues to have those conversations, but the competitive forces in most markets would suggest that it's very difficult to open them up.
And in your role as a human-centered advisor, you've already shared that, today, yesterday, you're in conversations about this human side. What would your advice be for people that are sensing and seeing some of these concerns, this gap between the technology and the human side, and maybe this gap getting bigger? What would your advice be to those that are sensing and seeing it to get behind a community or a tribe and work together to make a difference.
Yeah, and as I was saying earlier, the organisations, they're still fundamentally a human pursuit. They produce goods and services for human consumption. These things aren't changing. We're not building organisations to be able to provide for the robots. So, so there is still a human connection there, and so we need to have a focus on that, and we need to understand what it is that we want to be happy with from a point of view of how these organisations function, and the alignment with human well-being as part of that conversation. And yeah, the path to that conversation is not easy to identify or to implement. So I think we're very much in a transition period. And I think that, as I say, there's a renewed focus and a louder set of voices growing around what does this mean. But I think we're a long way from understanding what the resolution might be to those conversations.
Absolutely. And I think it's all about trying to make transformation more human, more honest, and more likely to stick. Daryl, it's been great talking to you. It's brilliant to hear your history, to remind us that, there is some learnings in the past that we can bring into the present. And what comes across is how key it is that people work together, be that internally in the workplace, in internal communities of practice, or external communities of practice to get a result. So thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. It's been great talking to you.
Whatever Next, Unplugged. Conversations about making transformation more human, more honest, and more likely to stick. Find out more at whatevernextbook.com.